Sler.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely to be joined by you on this show. I encountered you at the Renegades and Rogues event at the Arts Centre, where various people with varying complex mental health issues were speaking at a panel on the stage. And you piped up at the end and you asked a question, and I was like, ooh, an academic. I'd really like to speak to this lady. So would you like to just introduce yourself and perhaps talk about the work that you do?
Sure. So I I wasn't planning to be an academic, but as they say, we make plans and life makes plans. I began my career in law as a solicitor, and because my kids were young, I wanted to have a bit more work-life balance, so I opted for academia. And I began my academic career, the research component of my career was about appropriate dispute resolution. So I guess to explain what that means, it's alternatives to going to court. So that includes mediation as one method where people take more ownership of the process compared to going to court where people usually don't have any ownership. The judge decides what the decision will be and people have to live with that decision. So the mediator really is somebody who has a particular skill set and helps the parties to see each other's perspectives and, if possible, come to a mutual agreement and resolve the matter without going to court.
Without the need for court.
Yes.
That would be ideal, wouldn't it?
I began with ADR and then I sort of gradually pivoted to access to justice and ADR. So I'm looking at how people who are neurodivergent, and in particular people with autism or autistic people, and how they experience the mediation process, which is a part of the broader legal process because it's so integrated into our legal system.
So I'm interested because autism expresses itself in different ways in different people. So how is it possible to come up with a one-size-fits-all approach? No,
it's not. I think if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So we recognise that everybody is unique, whether they have autism or not. So it doesn't matter really in that sense. But I think what we were interested in this research was how do autistic people experience mediation? What kind of challenges do they face in that process? Do they experience any positives in the process, or did they? And what can be done to the mediation process to make it more accommodating of autistic people? So what can be improved and what can be adjusted? And our research is really just scratching the surface of this area because I don't think there's much research that's been done to date at all. It's very scant research. So I'm hoping that this kind of opens the door to that, and that more people will research this area and look at different neurodivergences and how their needs are met or not met in the legal system more broadly.
Oz, can you let me know, are there different types of support for autistic people throughout their lives? And what are you aware of?
So what I am aware of is that the research traditionally on autism has had a focus on children. I mean, there is now research on adults as well, but the vast majority of government services, for example, interventions during a child's school education period, is offered in childhood. So, and of course, there's good reason for that. There are interventions available for children, for example, at primary school age, so that they can, reach their potential. But what does seem to happen is once an autistic person reaches adulthood, there are far fewer services and supports available to that person. And I see this as a bit of a short-sightedness. And of course, there are limited resources that the government has. However, these people do need support throughout their lives. I know that, for example, autistic people have the highest rate of unemployment among the different disability groups. So they do struggle generally with not only finding employment, but maintaining employment. And I know that from my own son's experience as well. So I have lived experience of that too. So autistic people ideally need those sort of supports throughout their lives, not just when they're children. And I think the NDIS does go some way towards it, but it's not enough. I think people who are autistic need support with employment, skills building, education when they're at university, for example. I think they also need help with assistance with even the last stages of their lives in palliative care, for example. There isn't really any accommodation for neurodivergent people for their end-of-life services. So there are many gaps in the system.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
So can you let me know maybe a little bit about the story of your son and how that drew you into the realm of research that you find yourself now?
My son was diagnosed quite late. He was 16, which meant that and back in those times there were fewer interventions available for school-aged children. But when he was finally diagnosed, it actually made a lot of sense as to why some of his behaviours were the way they were. What it did make me realise as my son matured, it was that he had great difficulty finding employment, in the sense that he was interested in apprenticeships, and he would secure an apprenticeship, but he wouldn't last longer than a week or two. And this continued for at least 4 or 5 times that he got into an apprenticeship. He's very passionate about motor engines and cars, so it's not that he wasn't able to do the job, it was the communication issues he had with his employers that was the biggest challenge that he faced. So, for example, once I remember writing an email to one of his employers saying, if you would like to get the best out of my son, it would be better to draw a diagram for him of where the post office is rather than verbally explaining it. So I found that I had to try to educate his employers who were not necessarily interested in investing this kind of time in my son. Thankfully, later in life, he was able to set up his own business, and he's self-employed and has been self-employed for a few years now, and is much more content.
That's wonderful for him. I know for myself and my history, I've kind of always fallen into my own sandpit rather than visiting others.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Eva.
So how old is your son now?
He's 30.
Wow. And his job, he does?
Yes. He's a motor mechanic. He has his own service workshop.
Brilliant.
And he loves his job.
And he was able to do that without an apprenticeship, or he finally found an apprenticeship that accommodated him? He
did do part of an apprenticeship with somebody else, but then he also did a number of courses at TAFE, so he was able to qualify.
Excellent. I'm happy for him. Tell me about the common hurdles that people with autism or neurodiverse people have in their access for justice. That's
a really good question. I think that because there are different levels of autism, the people who are on the level where they don't need as much support as people who have more severe autism, for example, who are non-verbal. And the more severe autism is more obvious for people who don't know anything about autism. If a person's non-verbal, it's clearer that they have a disability.
Of course.
But when people are I don't like using this term, but there's a term that has been used in the past called high functioning autism. Really what that means is that they need less support than people who are severely autistic, but they still struggle a great deal. And the problem is it's not visible to people who don't know anything about autism. So they may appear a little bit quirky, a little bit odd, but not necessarily disabled.
But they pass.
Yes. And people treat them as neurotypical. And therein lies the problem, that they are treated as neurotypical, but they're not. And they don't get any accommodations that they really should be receiving. So, for example, a mediation process is a highly verbal process where the mediator talks to the parties, and this may be completely overwhelming for an autistic person. They may have difficulty processing all that verbal information on the spot, engaging in executive level decision making on the spot under time pressure. This is incredibly overwhelming for a typical autistic person. So our research results actually confirmed this, that this is exactly how autistic people experience the mediation process, that they looked as though they were okay in many ways, but they were not. They were pretending that they understood things because they didn't want to be seen as not understanding, but in many cases it was completely overwhelming. They needed breaks, they needed to be given the information in different formats, not just a verbal method. So it's extremely challenging for them. Yeah.
I have had recent experience of my access considerations not being respected or catered for, and it was a terrible experience. It really was. So I can empathise with that situation. So I have here in my notes flying under the radar for lifetimes. Would you like to speak a little bit about that?
Yes, I think that there are many people, especially people who are from the older generations, people from the X generation, for example, who haven't really been diagnosed, so they kind of fly under the radar. They're seen as a bit quirky or a bit eccentric, but they've never been diagnosed. And those people who are not aware that they have autism, and they don't know, if they don't know it, they can't really ask for accommodation. I mean, maybe they can, but it makes it a bit more difficult. I think being able to, if you do know you've got a diagnosis, it kind of makes it clearer for you that there are certain things that you need adjustments in. And I think it may give a person more confidence to ask for those adjustments, whether it's adjustments in the education system or adjustments in the legal process. I think knowing what your needs are and having the confidence with it. You don't necessarily have to tell a person that you have autism to have an adjustment, but I think it would give the person a bit more confidence to know that these are my needs and this is what I need to be done.
For sure.
Yeah.
We at the beginning of today we spoke to somebody about the hidden sunflowers bracelet, and I could see this being used in the case of autism quite a lot. Have you encountered this much in your?
Yes, the hidden sunflowers, and there's also a card that some people have on their person. Yeah.
Can you let me know about the adaptations that exist for those with autism in the legal process?
So at the moment, there are very few adaptations. There are some programs, but they're very limited in their scope. So, for example, there are in the criminal justice system, there is there is what we call an intermediary. These are people who are communication specialists. So they are often from backgrounds like speech pathology or occupational therapy, and they act as a third person between a vulnerable witness, like a child who's been subjected to sexual abuse, and the barristers or the legal team who are trying to interview the child. So it's a very limited context, and it's clearly not enough, because people who are autistic often do end up in court because they are very misunderstood or can be misunderstood. For example, people who are autistic, severely autistic, often have, they can be very misunderstood by law enforcement. So if an autistic person is having a meltdown, perhaps instead of an ambulance or ambulance staff who are trained in how to handle autistic people, if the police turn up, they can actually end up harming that person more. And that's exactly what one of our speakers in our upcoming symposium is going to talk about, because her son was shot dead, unfortunately, by police. So it's a very unfortunate and tragic situation, but autistic people are more vulnerable in these situations, and we need more people in the law enforcement who are actually trained in how to handle these kinds of emergencies with people who are disabled.
Of course. You mentioned a symposium. Now, I understand that's happening on the 26th of November at La Trobe University. Would you like to speak about that?
Sure. So this is on the 26th of November, which is a Wednesday. It will be a symposium that's both online and in person. The in-person tickets have sold out, but there's more room online. And it's about access to justice and mental health. So we have a range of speakers. One of them is going to be Judy Deacon, who I mentioned earlier. Her son had a disability and unfortunately was shot dead by police. The other speakers are going to be talking about different issues related to mental health. One of them will be talking about the NDIS appeals process. So again, a legal process where most clients of the NDIS do have great challenges in navigating that appeal process, and she's going to talk about that process itself. Another speaker is going to talk about mental health issues among the lawyers who are trying to assist vulnerable clients. So there's a whole range of speakers, and we're going to cover the issue. So
what was it that drew you to develop this symposium? I figure you're one of the production team. What inspired you to do this?
Well, I think mental health currently is an epidemic in our society, and it's not just limited to people who have disabilities or disabled people, but I think it does disproportionately affect disabled people more. They are more vulnerable to mental health issues, and I think this really needs to be addressed. So, for example, autistic people have a much higher propensity for anxiety and depression than the neurotypical population. So there are definitely connections between mental health and disability, and I think that also needs to be under the radar.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in and speaking with us, Oz.
Thank you so much, Eva.
Thanks.